All right, today I am lucky enough to be joined by the great Billy Vera. Billy, how you doing today, sir?
Great. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely, definitely a pleasure. So we're coming towards the end of a pretty crazy year. Of course, we have the pandemic going on. I want to know, how have you been personally in 2020?
Well, personally, I've been pretty good. I've managed to keep busy, doing different things and, writing some books and, getting things started online to try to peddle them. That's always a important part of the equation. So, yeah, I'm all right.
Excellent. Tell me about those books.
Well, the newest one is my first novel called A
Excellent.
Dollop of Toothpaste. And it's sort of a part mafia tale, part political satire, and part love story between an odd love story between a fellow and a girl, and also love of several different families and how they all intertwine. And
Excellent.
if you're from New Orleans, or if you're from the Westchester and Connecticut area of New York, you'll recognize an awful lot of places and people in that one. And then there's my memoir, which is Harlem to Hollywood. Uh, and then the third one is called Rip It Up, the Specialty Records Story, which Specialty Records was the label that had Little Richard and Sam Cooke, Larry Williams, Lloyd Price, and one of the seminal rock and roll rhythm and blues record companies of the 40s and 50s. And I was lucky enough that I used to work for them. I was lucky enough to have the founder of the company available to me, a fellow named Art Roop, who's now 103 years old, goes to work every day
Wow.
on his foundation. He has the Arthur N. Roop Foundation. And so he was there to help me, and he wrote the foreword for me. And so I'm kind of proud of that one, too.
I bet. So, Billy, you're involved in so many things, of course, great singer, songwriter, actor, involved in the books. Did you always know you wanted to be involved in so many things, or did it just kind of organically happen?
Well, my parents were in show business. My dad was an announcer on NBC in New York, and my mom was a singer. She had a sort of a beginning as a solo singer in Cincinnati, and then when we moved to New York when I was about 7, uh, she found it a little tough to get going as a soloist, and so she learned how to sight read music, and she became a background singer with the Ray Charles Singers on the Perry Como show, and she was also on the Pat Boone and Frankie Lane shows. So I was always around show business, and I loved it. And then, of course, I was about 11 years old when rock and roll kicked in, and that was it, man. I saw Chuck Berry on American Bandstand, and I wanted to be him. You know?
Nice. Now, can you think of any advice either or both of your parents gave you early on, being that you're trying to get into the music business?
Oh yeah, my mom especially. She said if you're going to be in show business, she said remember it's a business of peaks and valleys, and always live below your means, because one year you'll make a bundle, and the next year you might make nothing. So that was great advice, that she gave me. She always said, if you're going to be in a group, she said, always make sure your name is there. She said, break up, and your name is what you have to sell. So it was always Billy Vera and whoever.
Can you remember the first time you were booked for a gig or a venue?
Oh well, usually it was, yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, I was in high school. I was in my junior year, and a couple of seniors, they had a little band called the Pharaohs, and their lead singer left to join the Navy. Ironically, his name was Billy V. And so they had heard, some of the kids say, "Hey, man, Billy Vera can sing. Why don't you ask him?" So they asked me to sing with them. And the first gig was in Port Chester, New York, which is right on the border of Greenwich, Connecticut. And it was at St. Mary's Church. And it was supposed to have been Chuck Berry, Danny and the Juniors, a local band, a great band called the Orchids, and then Little Us as an opening act. Well, Chuck Berry had gotten arrested, so Chuck
Oh,
didn't show up. And so it was Danny and the Juniors and us and the Orchids. And so it was a big hall, church hall that they had with a big proscenium stage, great stage, and lots of kids. And so we went out there and we did our little act. And in those days you had to do choreography, and I did splits. I think I was singing Shout, and
okay.
I did a split and my pants split. And some little
Literally.
girl in the front row, she said, "Hey Billy, hey Billy, you got such nice underwears." And everybody laughed at me. And that was my very first gig.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Now, early on, was there ever a point where maybe you were performing somewhere where maybe the fans weren't receptive, or maybe you were even booed?
No, I don't think that, oddly enough, that ever happened because there weren't that many bands back then. So they were sort of grateful that anybody could play rock and roll. We did get
Excellent.
we did get a negative thing one time at another church dance in Yonkers, New York. It was St. Eugene's, and the kids were going wild. What we did was we used to go down to the city, Manhattan, and there was a place called Tie City, and we buy these cheap 50-cent ties and little cheap 50-cent or $1 cufflinks, and then we'd throw them out to the audience. Or I'd take off my jacket and I'd swing it around my head, and pretend to throw it out to the audience. And they were just going crazy for us.
Okay.
Well, the priest didn't like that. And he just came out and he pulled the plug, and the kids rioted, you know.
Whoa.
And then they all left, and that was the end of our gig. I don't even remember if we got paid or not.
Nevertheless, wow, crazy times.
Yeah, man. Rock and roll was new, and it was just, and it didn't even have to be good. We played. I remember in my sophomore year uh, at Archbishop Stepinac High School in White Plains, New York. They had a talent show, so we said, man, maybe we'll do that. And but there was just me and two other guys who had no musical experience. Uh, I this one kid named Henry. I put him on my drum set and taught him how to play 3 songs. He had never played drums before. And then my best friend John, who was tone deaf, literally tone deaf, but
Okay.
his father had bought him an amp and a guitar. So I needed him because I didn't have an amp. I was playing my guitar at home through my mother's tape recorder. So we get up there and we did, I think, 2 songs, and we got 296 out of 298 votes. And because there was nobody there that were playing rock and roll. Not that we were any good. There was one kid who had talent on the show. His name was Germano Romano, and he was a wonderful classical piano player. I mean, I think they said his hands were insured. He was literally great, and he probably got the other 2 votes. Well, one of the priests at school, he was determined that we were not going to win, so he recruited, excuse me, 5 guys from the marching band, and he had them play Dixieland, which was the squarest music, to us kids. And of course, they got no votes. And of course, the priest uh, never spoke to any of us the rest of our years at Stepinac.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Wow. So you said you don't necessarily have to be good, at least then. So what would you say the most important thing is in the music business? Is it stage presence? Is it work ethic?
Well, there's all that, and luck and timing. If you come out with a certain kind of style that's not in style. I'll give you an example. Years and years later, when I moved to Los Angeles, uh, I came out here to write songs for Warner Brothers Music, and I ran into a fellow that used to play bass for me back in New York. Chuck Fiore was his name, And he said, "What are you doing on the weekend?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know anybody but you, you know." And he said, "Why don't we come down and sit in with these guys in this band?" I played with some guys. So we did, and it was fun. And then somebody said, you know, let's start a band just for fun. We'll meet some girls or something, you know. 'Cause by now we're all in our early 30s,
Okay.
and so we, you know, one thing led to another. And Chucky said, this was Chucky's idea. He said, "You always wanted to have a band like Ray Charles, Fats Domino, with all the saxophones and everything." I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." He said, "We don't care about making money at this point. It's just about making good music." Well, at that time, there was, if you'll remember, there was a band called the Knack that had a big hit record called My Sharona.
Absolutely.
And all the record companies were looking for another Knack for guitars, you know, two guitars, bass, and drums. And we were different. We had four saxophones and a pedal steel, and we were playing rhythm and blues. So we didn't care because we weren't really trying to get a record deal seriously. We, you know, geez, 32, 33 years old. We're too old to be rock and roll stars, we thought.
Right.
And so, you know, we finally got a gig at the world famous Troubadour, and we played there every Monday night at midnight. And you know, when we first started playing there, what they did on Mondays, they had a lot of folky kind of acts play, and they do 20-minute sets. So the guy asked me to bring my band in, the Beaters, and I said, "Well, I can't bring 10 guys in, you know, to do 20-minute set. It's really not fair to ask the guys to do that." He said, "Well, what if I put you on at midnight and you could play as long as you want?" Now, this is a Monday night, the worst night of the week. Midnight, the worst hour of the week. So we thought, well, okay, you know, maybe we'll start to get a crowd in about 6 weeks or so. Well, 2 weeks into our gig there, it was lines around the block. And we were
Oh,
presenting something that nobody else had done in many, many, many years. And I guess it was the timing that people were tired of all this guitar stuff and they wanted to hear, you know, saxophones and rhythm and blues. And, you know, I came from a show business background. And at that time, you know, a lot of the bands, they didn't present themselves in a professional manner. They just play the songs and they wouldn't even announce what song was next. And they wouldn't talk to the audience. And, you know, I had a background in my early career playing the Appolo Theater, and you had to put on a show. You had to speak to the audience. You had to communicate. You had to connect with people. So I know how to do that, and so we became the hottest band in LA. You know, at that point.
excellent. So we're talking about the Apollo Theater. You of course had your iconic moment performing at the Apollo Theater with Judy Clay, first black woman, first white male to perform on stage. Tell me about that.
Well, at the time, I was a staff songwriter at a publishing company, and then I also played 6 nights a week with my little band. This is back in New York. And then I would get up in the morning and I'd get on the train and I'd go down and I'd write songs all day with a fellow named Chip Taylor. Uh, Chip was a great songwriter, about 4 years older than me, and he also, coincidentally, went to the same high school I did about 4 years earlier. And he wrote songs like Wild Thing and Angel of the Morning. And
Yeah.
he was sort of my mentor as a songwriter. So the first song we ever wrote together was called Make Me Belong to You. And it became a hit for Barbara Lewis on Atlantic Records. So that was our entree to Atlantic, which was my favorite record company. You know, Ray Charles, the Drifters, the Coasters, Bobby Darin, they were all on Atlantic, my favorite artists.
Absolutely.
So we said, let's write a duet, maybe for some of these Atlantic stars, and we'll take it up there and see if they go for it. So we made a demo of this song called Storybook Children, and we took it up to Jerry Wexler, who was the big cheese at Atlantic, And he pounded his fist on the desk. He says, "Man, that's a smash." He said, "But get rid of the girl. I'll record you on Atlantic
Really?
Records." I said, "Whoa." So at the time, as I said, we were playing at this one club that on the weekends where we played 2 dance sets, and then they'd bring in current hit record acts who would do 2 shows, and we would play for them because most of them didn't bring bands. They might at best bring a guitar player. Well, one of those acts was Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, and we played a lot with them because they were not an expensive act, so we had them up there a lot. And one of the girls in the group, Nona Hendryx, had a voice I thought would blend well with mine. So I called her up in Philadelphia and I said, "Nona, you want to make a record with me? You guys are on Atlantic, and Atlantic wants to put out this song that Chip and I wrote as a duet." She said, "Sure, I'd love to sing with you." So we recorded it with Nona. And then their manager got in on the act. Mr. Montague was his name. And he said, "No, no, if Billy and Nona have a hit, it'll break up the group. And that's no good." But Patty and the girls, they said, "No, no, come on, Mr. Montague. We need a guitar player. Billy's great. And, you know, nobody can play our music. Our music is too hard for most of these club bands." So they were hoping to get me as a guitar player. And also, if Nona and I had a hit, their thinking was it would raise the price of the act. You know, Nona and I could do our hit, and Patty and them could do their hits. But Mr. Montague was against it. So
Okay.
then we had to audition about 20 more girls, and one was worse than the other. They all sounded like they should be singing Broadway show tunes, you know, Stephen Sondheim songs. And finally, we were almost ready to give up. And Jerry Wexler said, "Listen, we just got this girl, Judy Clay. She's a cousin of Dionne Warwick, and, you know, take a listen to her, see what you think." So she came up to the office, and in she walked. She's about 14 months pregnant,
Oh
and
my.
she's got a chip on her shoulder the size of Wyoming, because Dionne had made it. Dionne's sister Dee Dee Warwick had made it. The aunt, Cissy Houston, had been doing well with the Sweet Inspirations. And Judy, who came out of the same gospel group, the Drink Art Singers, she had never been able to score a hit. And she was kind of bitter. And it
Right.
showed, you know. So she left. She sang great. And so when she left, everybody said, "Well, she sings great, but man, that attitude, do you think you can handle that?" I said, "Well, I got a sister like that, you know." I said, "I can handle that." And as it turned out, Judy and I became friends, and we remained friends until the day she died about 10 years ago. So the record comes out, Billy Vera and Judy Clay, Storybook Children. And unlike most records, which take off in the hinterlands, uh, our records took off in New York. And soon it was #1 on the black stations in New York. And I think it rose to #3 on the pop stations. And so the Appolo wanted to book us sight unseen. They hadn't seen our picture yet.
Okay.
So we get up there, and in those days, the Appolo was a 7-day-a-week house. They did 5 shows a day, starting on Friday morning and then ending the following Thursday night. So you get up there Thursday night to rehearse after the last show of the previous week, and then you rehearse with the house band, which was a great band led by Reuben Phillips. And so I get up there, and the stage manager was a fellow named Honey Coles of the famous tap dance team Coles and Atkins. And he said, Harlem hasn't seen you yet, meaning me.
All right.
He said, "I got an idea." He said, "Judy, you enter first from stage right. And Billy, you enter from stage left. And you wait 3 steps for her to make her entrance, and then you make your entrance and watch what happens." So we did that. And he put us on second. There might have been 7 or 8, 9 acts on the show. And the first opening act was always a well choreographed, visually exciting act to get the audience going. And then the second spot was usually for newer acts or acts that were not that great. And then better, 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 better star. And so we were on second. So I wait for her 1, 2, 3, and then I make my entrance. 1,500 people gasp. I hear them out there going, "That's him? That skinny little white boy, that's him?" Well, we went over like gangbusters. They loved us. And this was quite something because you see, a month earlier, Martin Luther King had gotten killed.
Okay.
There was riots across the river in Newark, New Jersey, going on over there, and they were kind of scared that maybe people wouldn't take too kindly to a little white boy stealing a black girl. But as it turned out, just the opposite. They loved us. And so after the first show, Honey Coles comes up to our dressing room, and he says, "Listen, I'm changing up the show." He said, I'm going to put you all on right before the star. He says, because ain't nobody going to follow you two.
Oh
And
my.
that became our spot every time whenever we played the Apollo, right before the star.
Wow. So you come out on stage, you hear this gasp. They're not expecting it to be a skinny white male like you had said. What went through your head? Did that make you nervous, or were you excited at the opportunity? Did you realize it's going to be this iconic moment that we're still going to be talking about in 2020?
Well, I had played with a lot of these black acts at the club where we played on weekends, and we became friendly. And some of them would talk about their experience at the Apollo the first time. Oh, I was so scared. Oh, I almost couldn't go on stage. Oh, my knees buckled. Blah, blah. But I was a customer at the Apollo. I had been there when James Brown made that live album at the Apollo that just broke him through. And I don't know why, but I felt like I belonged there, oddly enough. And I had not one moment of fear. Uh, I have to admit, maybe I was stupid, but as it turned out well. So
Definitely.
no, it was fine.
Very good. So working with Judy, you said she had a little bit of a chip on her shoulder. Now, do you think that helped your guys' creativity working together, or was it kind of hard, at least at first?
Oh no, not at all. She I recognized, like my sister, I recognized that beneath that gruff exterior was a scared little girl. She was about 8 years older than me, so she was not a little girl. And she had been in show business for a long, long time. But no, I think she sensed that I was on her side, and we never had a cross moment at all, ever, in all our time working together.
You guys remained close until she passed away about 10 years ago, you said?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean like daily contact. I mean, maybe
Sure.
she'd call me once a year, and we'd have a nice long conversation. But it would usually revolve around, hey, Billy, duets is coming back. Maybe we ought to think about making a record, that kind of thing. And sort of toward the end of her life, maybe the last 10 years, she had moved back home to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and she was singing gospel music by that time. Uh, her sister was in the Sweet Inspirations. Her sister Sylvia Shemwell, who had a voice you almost couldn't tell them apart. With husky, deep, deep voice singers,
Okay.
and the Sweet Inspirations sang on our album as well. So that was kind of, made her feel comfortable having relatives on the record with us. And we made some good records. Had 2 hits, and then what happened was I was backstage at the Apollo, and Jerry Wexler called me up, and he said, "Well, Stax Records and Atlantic we're splitting up our partnership, and see, Judy was signed to Atlantic through Stax." He
Okay.
said, "So the two of you contractually won't be able to record together anymore." He said, "But don't worry." He said, "I found you a song for you to do as a solo." And it was a song that was on Bobby Goldsborough's Big Honey album, called With Pen in Hand. He said, when do you finish the Apollo? I said, well, Friday night. He said, okay, I'm going to book our studio at Atlantic Friday morning, 9 a.m. He said, I'm going to send you the album. You learn the song if you like it. If you don't like it, I'm going to give it to Brooke Benton or Percy Sledge or somebody else. He said, because this song's a smash. So I knew that he would work hard on it since he liked it so much. And as it turned out, it's a great song.
Definitely. Big hit, yeah.
Oh, killer song. So I go in there, I sing it, and the record comes out. It became a hit, my first solo hit, you know. So there I was. It seemed like I was on my way. You know, I did the Dick Cavett show, but then my producers, Chip and his partner, they got called up in their Air Force reserves, and so they weren't really able to spend the time and concentration to make the album. In those days, you didn't make an album first. You did a single, and if the single became a hit, then they'd let you do an album. Unless you were from Great Britain, and then they let you do albums. That was the thing. But so the album, there was nothing really. It was a good, solid album, but there was nothing that stood out like With Pen in Hand did. And by that time, this is 1968, mid 1968, and the music was, in general, was changing rapidly. And you know, I was what they used to call a blue-eyed soul singer, and that was sort of out. That was no longer, almost overnight. It was not the popular thing anymore. So I'm for the next 10 years, I'm like, what do I do? You know, I can't do disco. You know, I can't be a wimpy singer-songwriter. You know, one of those types. You know, I couldn't be a heavy metal guy. You know, I was my world was the Apollo. You know, I was, you know, playing for black people mostly, and middle class, working class, blue collar whites was our audience with Judy Clay. You know, everyday black people and blue collar whites was really who our demographic, as they say in the marketing world, was. So I struggled for the next 10 years. You know, playing survival gigs. I put together a little trio. We played everything from, you know, you know, firemen and cop bars in the Bronx to hippie bars in Connecticut to, you know, you name it. You know, we played everything. Holiday Inns, you know, Ramada Inns, and anything. Or I'd take gigs working with some of the girl groups I had known in the 60s. You know, I was the Shirelles guitar player for a couple of years. I played with the Chiffons and also the Ronettes when Ronnie Spector left Phil Spector, her husband, came back home to her mother's house and wanted to start singing again. I was her conductor and guitar player. So that was how I survived. You know, nobody was interested in making records with me. Steve Cropper was, you know, from Booker T and the MGs.
Okay.
Yeah, he brought me down to Memphis, made an album with me, which never came out. And that was about the extent of, oh no, I made another album in the 70s, which went nowhere as well. And then one night, at the middle of the 70s, we're playing a Ramada Inn for 2 weeks in New Jersey. That's a low point of anybody's career. Well, because what happens is, during the week, you're playing to like 3 or 4 businessmen who are there, you know, and don't like you because the waitresses are looking at you instead of them. And on the weekends, maybe you'd have enough of a crowd to justify your salary. And so I come off stage. It was a Tuesday or Wednesday night, and the waitress comes over. She says, "That fellow over there with his wife would like a word with you." So I go over there and I meet the guy. crazy eyes, big head. He said, he puts out his hand. He says, Vera, my name's L. Russell Brown. I wrote Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree. And I'm like, great, good for you,
Right.
He says, Vera, he said, I have your records home. He says, you're one of the greatest singers in the business. You're a great songwriter. He says, everybody knows how great you are. But you never make any money. Look at you. You're playing this dump. He says, me, I make a lot of money and nobody respects me like they respect you. So I'm like, Jesus Christ, make me feel good, Larry, And he says, I got an idea. He said, I had an idea while I was out there listening to you. He said, you and I ought to write together. He said, I could teach you how to write songs that make money, and you could teach me how to write songs that get respect. So, everybody wants what they don't have, So I started going over his house in the afternoons, right? And sure enough, we started writing songs. And he had a lot of energy, this guy, Larry Brown. And sometimes we'd write 2, even 3 songs in a day. Not all good, but we'd write. And like everybody that does something well and successfully, they want to try something else. And so he gets a job producing. He wanted to producing Nancy Sinatra. So this one day he said, listen, I need one more song for Nancy. He said, why don't you start something? I got to go pick up my wife at the beauty parlor. He said, start something and we'll finish it when I get back. I said, okay. So I'm sitting there and we've got his guitar in my hand. And I said, what do you write for Nancy Sinatra? Oh, she's got this famous father. So I had lines in there like, I love my daddy, but it really don't matter what my daddy might say, stuff like that to refer to Frank. So by the time Larry got back, I had finished the song. And I played it for him and he loved it. He said, man, this is a #1 hit if I ever heard one. So I'll play it for Nancy. So he plays it for her the next day or next couple of days. And she hated it.
Oh, wow.
Didn't want to record it. So Larry now is furious because he sees a #1 song going out the window, He says, you got to do something. You got to prove me right and prove her wrong. So my friend Crazy Joe had a little country band up in Connecticut. And so he had a girl singer in there who had a nice voice. But as it turned out, she was kind of lazy and she didn't learn the song properly. And we went in and recorded it with her. And then we took it around, and everywhere we went, love the song, hate the girl. Love the song, hate that girl, So finally, the last guy on my list was a guy named Charlie Koppelman. And he had a company. They produced outside artists. He said, love the song, hate the girl, but we're recording Dolly Parton next week. He said, give me the song for Dolly and I'll guarantee it'll be the single. Well, the reason this guy was the last on my list is because I didn't trust him. So I said, Charlie, put it in writing and give me some money, some advance money. So I figured he'd give me a couple of $100, And so he sends his girl back in the back to write a check. And I didn't even look at it. So I'm riding down in the elevator. I had my little girlfriend with me at the time. And she says, give me that check. She opens the envelope and she says, holy baby. She said, he gave you $2,500.
Wow.
Which was a fortune in 1978, So I said, well, I guess he's serious. So in the interim, he cuts it with Dolly and it comes out just as I get the offer to go to LA and write for Warner Brothers. And so I packed everything. I was like this loser musician living at my mother's house at 33 years old. And so I packed everything I owned into my car and I'm driving out Route 10 across the United States. And every 20 minutes, here comes my song. Dolly singing my song. I hadn't had a hit record in 9 years.
Wow.
And the day I hit Los Angeles, 6 days later, it was #1 on the country charts. And I said, wow,
Crazy.
I'm back in showbiz, you know?
You're back.
Yeah, it was, so I felt it was an omen, you know, that I was going to do okay out here, you see?
So were you hands on Dolly Parton when you were working, or they just delivered her the song? You didn't even necessarily have to meet with her in the studio or anything?
No, I didn't meet her till after she recorded it. What happened was I was still living at my mother's house after she recorded it, and I get a call from Dolly's assistant, and she said, Dolly would like to meet the guy that wrote this wonderful song. So I said, well, I'm here in New York. Is she playing anywhere nearby? And so it turned out the closest place she was playing was at a venue in Maryland. So I thought, well, that's, you know, that's a pretty good, that's a real good opportunity to meet her, and maybe later on she'll record another of my songs. Who knows? So I took the long drive down to Maryland. Brought my daughter, who was 12 at the time, and we went down there. And Dolly was it was my first meeting with a big country star, and she's in the big decked out bus, you know, and she just couldn't have been nicer. I mean, I don't think I've ever met anybody as nice as Dolly Parton in all of show business. And she was back there. She had us hanging out in her bus, you know, and you know she would say things like she had a shelf over here with all these shoes. Everything was shiny, you know. And she said, look at these shoes. She says, I found these at the Goodwill for like $6 a pair. And she said she was funny. She was really funny too. She said, my audience, they don't want me to be some hippie singer. She said, you know, with blue jeans and all that stuff. She said, my audience, those are guys that drive tractors all day long. She said, they want to see a princess when they come see me. She said, so I give them that. I give them something bright and shiny and big. And you know, she knew she was real smart and real funny and just as nice as could be. So she says, all right, y'all come with me. And she was ready to go on stage. And, you know, I'm used to people preparing to go on stage. And she just had me and my daughter there with me. And my daughter was chattering away. I said, baby, be cool. I said, Dolly has to prepare before she goes on. And Dolly says, oh, please. She says, honey, you stand here right with Dolly. She said, until I go on. And she kept my daughter there with her until the minute she stepped on stage. You know, she was one of a kind lady.
Is that what makes her so great? Sounds like she is the complete package from the look. She's got a sense of humor, great performer.
Oh, she is in my mind the definition of a star, a real star. You know, everything you would want a star to be. You know, no diva crap from her, like so many of them.
Right?
And she's not dumb like so many of them. You know, I mean, she's really a bright and just as kind-hearted as you could ever imagine somebody to be. Yeah.
Excellent. So Dolly Parton, you got your huge song, I Really Got a Feeling. You're a singer, a songwriter. Now, you have this incredible hit with her, but you also being a singer, is there any part of you that almost wishes you wrote that song for yourself?
No, it was written, you know, as a professional songwriter, you write for not just the artist, but you write, well, yes, you do write for the artist. My training as a songwriter was, you know, my boss would come in and say, hey, the Drifters are recording next week, or hey, Tony Bennett's recording next week, or, you know, the Shirelles are recording next week. Write something for that person. And so sometimes you'd find yourself writing from a female point of view. And I really got the feeling was really written as a girl's song. You know, the emotions, the the point of view, would really be more female than male. I mean, you can't picture a guy singing, "Oh, you're a gentleman," and a gentleman is getting mighty hard to find these days. Well,
Right.
how do you turn that around for a guy to sing it? It really would.
Sure.
It's one of those songs that really wouldn't do well with a male vocal.
Got it. So it's not like you have 20 songs you write and you just set them on the side and then, hey, by the way, I have the song. You kind of cater it to that artist or that female or that group.
Well, as I say, a lot of times, in the early days, you would write on an assignment. Another example is my boss came in one time and said Chuck Jackson, the great soul singer, Chuck Jackson, was coming up for a date, and then he needs something. So I thought for a while. I said, well, Chuck hasn't had a hit in a little while, and he's gotten kind of stale. And maybe I want to write something for Chuck that is exciting and excites him as a singer to sing. And at the time, I'd been listening to a blues song by Little Junior Parker called "Driving Wheel." And in the middle, the music stops, and Junior starts to preach like a preacher, and then starts up the song again. So I used that device in this song I wrote for Chuck Jackson. And I made a demo, and they took it to whoever, Chuck's producer, and he ended up not recording it. So then my publisher took it to a number of other people, I guess, and then it wound up with this new group called the Remains, a band of white kids from Connecticut and Boston area. They were popular in Boston, and so they recorded it, and it was very different than what I had envisioned for Chuck Jackson, but it was great. It was like in those days, a lot of the English groups were doing covers of American songs or Black American songs, and doing quite well with them. So I thought, wow, I'm going to have a hit with this great record by the Remains, and it did. Nothing happened. It just scraped the bottom of the charts. So a couple of years later, I'm down in the village, Greenwich Village, at a record store, and I'm going through the bins because I'm a record collector, insane record collector. And this sort of skinny fellow with long, stringy hair behind the counter recognized me, and he said, "Hey, Billy," he said, "I got I know where there's a stash of your Billy and Judy album and your With Pen in Hand albums." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Boy, where? Let me know. I could buy them up and sell them at the clubs when I play, And so we talked a little more. He said, "By the way," he said, "I produced a compilation album, and I used one of your songs on there." I said, "Really? Which one?" He said, "Don't Look Back." I said, "By the Remains?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "That's a real popular song down with my crowd down here in the village." So the album didn't sell very well, but he said, "Yeah, I used your song." I said, "Well, that's really cool. Thanks." So I found out that album, that the guy was oh boy, I feel terrible now. I can't remember his name. He played guitar with Patti Smith.
Okay.
Anyway, so cut to a few years later. Well, quite a few years later, maybe 20 years later, and I got my big hit out, and I get a phone call from Cyndi Lauper's husband. Somehow he got my number, and he said, "Oh, by the way, your song 'Don't Look Back' is really popular in our crowd." He said, "We just cut a track on it with Cyndi." Whoa! I said, "Cool." He said, "Yeah, she's thinking of doing a duet with Joan Jett on your song." I said, "Wow."
Wow. Big time.
It never came out. So then, maybe a few months later, somebody sends me a promo CD, 4-song promo CD of Robert Plant's new album. And my song "Don't Look Back" is on there. said, "Oh my God, Robert Plant, this is going to be great." Well, yeah, but by the time the album came out, the song didn't make it to the final cut of the album.
Oh, of
So now I
course.
think the song is jinxed.
Right.
Yeah,
Sounds like it.
it's doomed to never make any money for me. And so, cut to another 20 years, and Rhino Records puts out uh, an expanded version. Lenny Kaye was the name of the guy, of Lenny Kaye's Nuggets album, which had Don't Look Back on It by the Remains. And it sold a ton of box sets. So here we are 40 years after I wrote the song, it finally
Wow.
started to make some income. And then maybe 6 months or a year later, Rhino puts out a Robert Plant box set, and it's on there. So now here's this little song that couldn't, finally 40 years later could. You
Yeah,
know,
apparently. Jeez.
and it shows you the value of your songs, that you
Mhm.
never know when or where the success of that song will come from.
So we talked about how you never know when and where. We've also talked about timing. We talked a little bit about how the Beaters became a group.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we would talk about your huge hit at this moment. So first couple years, that wasn't the hit that we all know it to be, right?
Yeah, after the Beaters, early in the Beaters, were playing at the Troubadour for a year, then all those knack-like groups that the record company signed. Now, remember, during this whole year, A&R guys from the record companies were coming in to see us every week after they went to look for commercial acts. Acts they thought could sell.
Right.
They came in to see us just for the joy, because they loved our band. And I'd see them out there snapping their fingers, clapping their hands, stomping their feet, and nobody reaching for their wallet. So when all those other copycat acts failed, uh, then they start looking for something different. And we were different, than anything that was out there. We were the only horn band out there. And finally, I think in 2 weeks' time, we got 3 offers to to make records. And so we decided to choose Alpha Records, which was a company out of Japan that had opened an American office uh, filled with personnel that had worked for A&M Records. So they were all pros. And we were going to be the first act out on Alpha. So I knew we'd get the big push, the big initial push. And where you might get lost on a big company like Polygram or whatever. So we chose Alpha. And they did. They really worked hard to try to make us happen. We actually had a little hit record called "I Can Take Care of Myself." Went up to the middle of the charts, a little above the middle of the charts, and they sent us to Tokyo, where we won the gold prize at the Tokyo Music Festival, singing "At This Moment," which was the follow-up to "I Can Take Care of Myself." And well, it just so happened, talk about a bit of bad luck, the head of promotion at Alpha, got into a fight with the boss and quit, or was fired. I don't remember which.
Ah, of course.
And so we had nobody to promote the record.
Man.
And we knew by this time that people really liked "At This Moment." They had put out "I Can Take Care of Myself" first because it was up tempo and it had a catchy hook and a catchy melody, and easier to get on the radio. Well, so "At This Moment" goes to number 79, peters out. We made a second album for Alpha. Actually, my old friend from Atlantic, Jerry Wexler, came and produced it. Took me down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, to record with those guys down there. He wasn't really satisfied with the Beaters as they were at the time as a recording act. He said they're a great live band, one of the best. He said, but they need a little more seasoning, and I think I can make hit records for you using the Muscle Shoals band. Well, so by the time that album came out, uh, Alpha was on its last legs, and the Japanese pulled the plug, and there was no more American Alpha. So now I'm 35, 36, whatever years old, and I'm too old to be a rock and roll star. And by this time, now, cut to a couple years earlier, Chip Taylor's brother, John Voight, the actor,
Yes.
he came in to see me at the Troubadour one night with his acting coach, a fellow named David Proval, who you might remember from The Sopranos and the movie Mean Streets. And John came backstage and he said, "Man," he said, I've never seen anybody do what you do on stage." I said, "What do you mean, John?" He said, "Well, most singers, man, they get up there and they, hey, I'm going to make you laugh. I'm going to make you cry. I'm going to make you horny. I'm going to make you dance." It's all about what they're going to make the audience feel. He said, "You don't do that." He said, "You relate to the audience in a professional way, but," he said, but you lay it out there emotionally in a way that I've never seen a singer do that. Maybe Nina Simone, maybe Ricky Lee Jones, but most singers don't perform that way. They perform at an audience. He said, you're performing, but there's something real about what you do that I've never seen before." He said, "You should think about acting." I said, "Oh, John, please. You know, I don't really want to be an actor, man, at this stage of my life." He said, "No, no." He said, "I'm telling you." He said, "If you could," and then by this time, David joins in with him. He says, "Yeah, man." He said, "If I could get you to do what you do on that stage with singing a song and holding a guitar in your hand," he said, "if I could get you to do that without the guitar, without the song," he said, "you could be not a good actor, a great actor." I said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." So I gave in, they were very persuasive. I started going to these acting classes. And as it turned out, the method that Proval used was very similar to something I had been playing with on my own back in New York. I don't know where it came from, but I had this concept that, what if something, let's say I'm singing a funny song, a comedic song, but let's say, my sister dies or something that day. What is my job? Is my job to be funny? Or is my job, or is my obligation to feel what I'm feeling in real life? And then it came to me, what if my obligation is both of those things? Wouldn't the crashing together of those two obligations be have more impact and be greater? And as an artist, I'm thinking not just as an entertainer, wouldn't that be a greater gift to the audience than either one? Either you're just going ahead with the show must go on, or wallowing in my misery, you know. Uh, and so I'd kind of been working on that on my own, but Proval's class gave me the tools with which to work that out. Uh, so it took me a while to get it, uh, and but eventually I did, and people started asking me to be in plays, and then eventually I got offered to do a television show, and then one thing led to another, and then I'm starting to make money as an actor, even though my music career is going down the toilet. So, I mean, most of the roles, when you're from New York, they they hire you as to play thug of the week, on these TV shows. But I was getting other roles as well. So that was helping my income, and it was also helping my singing performance too, because I was able to apply what I had learned in my acting class to my musical performance as well, and make me a better performer.